Hello, Year 7. I hope that you're all well. I hope that you've had a lovely weekend, and I hope you enjoy this next chapter of the Tales of King Arthur. First of all, we are going to recap with what happened in chapter 2. So it starts off with Arthur and Merlin travelling, and they go to the Lake of Endless Waters, the Lady of the Lakes there. She says to Arthur that he can have the sword that's in the lake if she promises to kind of give him a favour in return, and also to return the sword to her when he dies, which he does and takes the sword. He returns back to his castle, and true to her word, the Lady of the Lake's daughter arrives and asks Merlin for a favour. So she says that her mother's given her a sword that belonged to her love, who's been slain by this really bad knight called Sir Garlon, and she's seeking a knight to avenge her love. So all the knights and Arthur try in vain to draw the sword, but then later there's a knight called Sir Balin, and he is able to draw the sword, and so initially she says he should return the sword to her, and he refuses, and she says, if you do refuse, something bad will befall the one that you love. And he kind of laughs it off, and you see later on what happens to someone that he loves very much. So he goes on his journey to try and find Sir Garlon, and along the way he meets a couple of other people who Sir Garlon has upset, and later he finds his way to the castle of Holy Hallows, and he comments as he's entering the land how beautiful everything is and how happy everyone is. And the reason that he's going there is that King Pellam is Sir Garlon's brother, and there's a feast there, and he knows that Sir Garlon will be at the feast, so he's going there to try and find him and kill him and fulfill his promise. So that he's told, Sir Balin's told anyway, that at the castle of Holy Hallows there are some holy relics which keep the land safe, and everyone's happy and everyone's flourishing. There's plenty of food, everything's really good. Sir Balin goes to the feast. He keeps his sword hidden under his clothes, and while he's there, he sees Sir Garlon and manages to get close enough to him to chop off his head. Obviously, his brother, Sir Garlon's brother, King Pellam, is furious, and then obviously wants to avenge his brother. Sir Balin also kills King Pellam, and as he does, he uses a spear that he finds in a room, and it turns out this spear is actually a spear that was used related to Jesus, that was used and against Jesus, basically because he stabs King Pellam and kills him with the spear. It defiles the spear, and it basically puts a curse on the land, and everyone is very unhappy and angry with him. All the animals are dying. There's a pestilence across the land, so there's illness, and all the crops die, and there's no food. And Merlin finds Sir Balin in the ruins and heals him and tells him that he's done a very bad thing, and there's a curse on the land now that can only be undone by a knight. And we'll see as we go through the book who that knight is. But Sir Balin's accepted that he's done a really bad thing, and he knows that his time will be up soon. So he's in the woods with Merlin, and he comes across a castle, and there's some jousting going on. He joins in, but he knows that here he'll meet his death. And he begins fighting, jousting with a knight. And they're just as strong as each other. Neither one can seem to beat the other. And it turns out that the knight is his brother, Sir Balin. And obviously Balin is devastated, and they end up killing each other in battle. And that's his punishment. as the daughter of the Lady of the Lake said earlier. And Merlin buries them both. And yes, that's the end of that chapter. There was a lot going on in that one, a lot to remember. So I'm going to switch screens now and start to read chapter 2. I'm going to read for about 20 minutes, and then I'll ask you to finish reading the chapter. And then there'll be a task set for you on Satchel 1 and Google Classroom. And just remembering that after half term, everything will just be on Google Classroom, just so that you know. So hopefully you can see that screen. So chapter 3, How Lancelot Was Made a Knight, the 4 Witch Queens, and the adventures at the Chapel Perilous. This sounds quite exciting. So as always, please read along with me, or you may, hang on, let me figure out how to move the page. Read along with me, or you can just listen, and then you'll carry on to the end of the chapter. So off we go. When King Arthur was arrived at the age of 25, his knights and barons counselled that he should take a queen, and his choice fell upon Guinevere, the daughter of King Leodegrance of the land of Cameliard. This damsel was the most beautiful and the most gracious in all the realm of Britain. When the marriage was arranged between her father and Merlin, King Leodegrance said that, for her dowry, instead of broad lands, of which King Arthur had many, he would give to Arthur the Table Round, which Uther Pendragon had in friendship given to him many years before. For, as King Arthur was already famous for his prowess and nobleness, and his love of knightly men and brave deeds, Leodegrance knew that this would be a gift beloved of Arthur. With the table were to go the knights who were its company. It seated 150 when it was complete, but many had been slain, and now they numbered but 100. When King Arthur heard from Merlin of the coming of Guinevere, with the 100 knights bearing the round table with them, he was very glad, for, said he, their noble company pleaseth me more than great riches. He charged Merlin to go and espy through all the land of Britain for another 50 knights, so that the tale of the noble company of the Round Table should be complete. Now it chanced that while Arthur sat in the hall of his palace at London, waiting for Guinevere to come to him, and for Merlin to return from his quest, King Ban, who aided him in his fierce battle against the 11 kings, sent his young son Lancelot to Arthur's court, to learn knightly deeds and noble prowess. None knew who he was but Arthur, who kept the matter secret. Many had smiled at the huge limbs of Lancelot, until his great strength had caused them to respect him, and, being but a young man, he had not yet got all the courtly bearing and noble manners for which in later time he was famous throughout all Christendom. So that many knights and ladies smiled sourly upon him, but others saw that he would shortly prove a fine man of his hands, full, courteous, and gentle, and of a noble nature and great presence. At the court was also young Gawain, son of King Lot and nephew of the king. Both Lancelot and Gawain were as yet not knighted, but together they tilted at each other in the lists beyond the walls, and spent their days in sword play and all knightly exercises. Lancelot was the stronger and the better fighter, and though Gawain never overcame him, yet they did twain love each other passing well. Now, Gawain went to the king one day and asked of him a gift, and King Arthur said he would grant it. Sir, said Gawain, while Lancelot stood a little way off, fondling the hounds that licked at his hand, I will ask that ye will make me knight the same day that ye shall wed fair Guinevere. I will do it with a good will, said the king. And Lancelot, he said, calling to the young man, have ye no boon to ask of me? Not at this time, sir, replied Lancelot, but in a little while I may. Into the hall next day, as the king sat at dinner, came an old woman bent and feeble, but with reverend white hair and gentle face, and she kneeled at the king's feet. What is it, dame? Said Arthur. What is it you crave? Justice, Lord King, she said in a weak voice, while the tears gushed from her eyes, or else I die beside the gate where you do give the justice that all men praise. Who hath done evil to you? Said the king. Sir Caradoc, of the Dolorous Tower in the marsh, replied the old woman. I and my son, lord, did build a little hut of wattle on a little plot which we banked from the marsh near the great wall of the rich baron, deeming it safe to rest within the shadow of the strong lord. And though his hard rule was hateful to those whom he oppressed, we were so humble that we thought he would not notice us, and meagerly we reared our living from the ground, and sold our poor herbs to Sir Caradoc his steward, or to the people in the villages in the marsh about us. But soon the Lord Caradoc desired the land on which our little hut was standing to make his lands the broader. He tore our poor home down, and scattered all, and thrust us out to wander in the marshes. And when my poor son pleaded with the Lord, he had him whipped, and he was brought and cast half dead at my feet as I waited outside the hall. Now, if thou givest us not justice, we shall surely die. Doth any know Sir Caradoc? Asked the king of his knights. Yea, sir, said one, and he is a great man of his hands, fierce and bold, of strong family, and his brother is Sir Turquine of Camber, who tried to slay me at Caerleon, and was with the 11 kings in battle, sir. Sir Caradoc liveth in a strong tower beyond the marshes to the south of the river, and he slayeth all that desire to pass them, unless they pay him all he demands. What? Said the king, with a fierce anger. Within a few miles of this, my justice seat, doth such tyranny rule unchecked, and ye tell me naught of it? Are ye then more fearful of this marsh robber than of me, your king? The knights hung their heads abashed, and were silent. Then Lancelot came and stood before the king. Let me, Sir King, go and summon this tyrant to your presence, he said, so that this poor dame may have justice, and that ye may punish him for his oppression. I fear me, Lancelot, thou art over young for so fierce a knight, said Arthur. I shall but bear thy word, sir, said Lancelot, and he will not harm thy messenger. Take 2 stout men-at-arms with you then, said Arthur, and say to this Sir Caradoc, that if he come not back with thee to answer unto me, I will come and take his life, and burn his evil tower to the ground. Many of the younger men that had despite against Lancelot for his greater prowess at the sword and the lance thought that now, indeed, they would be ridded of him, for they deemed Sir Caradoc would slay him. 2 days later came young Lancelot back with his 2 men-at-arms, and with them bound upon a great horse was a full, fierce, and raging knight, red of face, large of body, his clothes all tossed and torn, and his mouth full of dire threatenings against Lancelot. Men made way for them, marvelling, and together Lancelot and his captive rode up the hall to the king. Here, Lord, is Sir Caradoc, of the Dolorous Tower in the marsh, said Lancelot. He would not come when I gave him your message, so I bided my time until he was sunk in wine, and was sleeping alone, and I have brought him secretly from his hold. Now, Lord King, I think Sir Caradoc would joust with me, if you will give me a knighthood. Joust with thee, thou smooth-faced boy, cried Sir Caradoc, straining at his bonds. I will spit thee on my lance, if I may get at thee, and when thou art slain, I will fight with this little king of thine, and his death shall wipe out this insult thou hast put upon me. At his rage and fierce bearing, men marvelled, and many were afeard, seeing that Sir Caradoc was great in lands and kinsmen, and big of his body. Thou art full young, Lancelot, said Arthur, to joust with so strong a knight. Let an older man have ado with him. Sir King, cried Lancelot eagerly, I claim the first battle with this strong tyrant. He is my captive, and I claim it. Have it as ye will, said Arthur, and God speed you, but I misdoubt me much. 'Twill end in your sorrow. Ay, and thine too, thou gentle lady's knight, sneered Sir Caradoc. "Peace, man, peace," said the king sternly. "I think God will fight in this battle, for I have inquired far, and the tale of thy evil deeds is over full." So he basically means that Arthur's asked lots of people, and he's heard lots of very bad things about this Sir Caradoc. Therewith King Arthur made young Launcelot knight, and men eagerly rushed away to the tilting ground to see the battle between the virgin knight Sir Launcelot and the old robber knight Sir Caradoc. And when Sir Caradoc was released and armed, he laughed and shook his lance, so sure was he of revenge right speedily. Then they hurtled together most fiercely, and young Sir Launcelot was thrust from his horse by Sir Caradoc. Quickly he rose from the ground, and dressed his shield, and drew his sword, and cried, "Alight, Sir Caradoc, for I will fight thee on foot." But Sir Caradoc, being traitorous, rode at Sir Launcelot with his spear, as if he would pin him to the earth, and the young knight had much ado to avoid him. All the knights cried out upon Sir Caradoc for a foul night, and for shame he threw down his lance and alighted, and rushed at Sir Launcelot full fiercely in order to slay him instantly. But that was not easily to be done, for however wise Sir Caradoc was in sword-play, he was mad with wrath, and therefore thought of naught but to slay his enemy instantly. He raged like a wild boar, and gave Sir Launcelot many evil strokes, yet never did he beat down the young knight's guard. Soon men perceived that Sir Caradoc's great fierceness was causing him to make blind strokes, and then Sir Launcelot seemed the more wary. Suddenly they saw the young knight leap forward, and beat so heavily upon the other's helm that it cracked. Sir Caradoc strove to guard himself, but Sir Launcelot was so wroth and so mighty of his blows that he could not. At last Sir Launcelot beat him to his knees, and then thrust him grovelling to the ground. Sir Launcelot bade him yield, but he would not, and still sought to thrust at the other. Then the young knight struck at him between the neck and head, and slew him. So this bit here where it says Sir Launcelot bade him yield, Launcelot was saying, give up, give in, and admit that you've lost, and he wouldn't, so he's still fighting. And then Sir Launcelot seals his win with a blow between the neck and head, and slains Sir Caradoc. All very exciting stuff. Both the knights and the common people shouted with joy, and acclaimed Sir Launcelot as a noble and mighty knight. But the young man was full modest, and withdrew from the press. King Arthur gave unto him the Dolorous Tower and the lands which had belonged to Sir Caradoc, and Launcelot caused the old dame and her son to be given a fair piece of land and a hut, and many other wrongs and evil customs that had been done by Sir Caradoc, Sir Launcelot caused to be righted. The kinsmen of Sir Caradoc went apart, and conspired to have Sir Launcelot slain, but for a long time they would not come at him. So the kinsmen is the brothers, followers, friends of Sir Caradoc were plotting against Sir Launcelot to kill him, but they are biding their time. They're not doing it just yet. Then when the queen came unto King Arthur, there was a great feasting and joustings and merry games, and Sir Launcelot, for his knightly prowess in the lists, and for his gentle courtesy and noble manners to all, both poor and rich, high and low, was sought by many, and for some time he rested himself in knightly games and play. Then on a day in June, when a sudden wind from a lattice blew upon his face, as he laughed and jested with the ladies and knights in silks and rich garments, he bethought him of the fair green woods and the wide lands through which lonely roads were winding. And departing from the hall forthwith, he bade his horse and arms to be brought to him, and rode into a deep forest, and thought to prove himself in strange adventures. So he leaves Arthur and the kingdom behind. He asks for his horse and his armour to be brought to him, and he rides off to find adventure in the forest. Thus faring, he rode for 2 days, and met with naught, that means nothing. On the third day the weather was hot about noon, and Sir Lancelot had great list to sleep. He espied a great apple tree full of white blossoms, and a fair shadow was beneath it. And he alighted and tied his horse unto a thorn, and laid his helmet under his head, and slept. While he thus lay, there rode by him on white mules 4 ladies of great estate, with 4 knights about them, who bore a canopy of green silk on 4 spears, so that the high sun should not touch the faces of the ladies. Then as they rode by, they heard a war horse grimly neigh, and looking aside they were aware of Sir Lancelot all armed and asleep under the apple tree. So Lancelot is quite vulnerable here. He's asleep. The ladies came nigh him, which means they came near him, and of them there was Queen Morgan le Fay, who was wife of King Lot, and an evil witch, the Queen of Northgales, a haughty lady, the Lady of the Out Isles, and the Lady of the Marshes. And when the Lady of the Marshes saw the knight, she cried, "Now, this is as good hap as ever could be, for this is he that slew my brother Sir Caradoc of the Dolorous Tower, and for revenge of that I would have this knight taken to my tower and torture him before I slay him." So she's saying to get revenge for her brother Sir Caradoc, and because he was killed by him, she's going to capture him while he's sleeping and take him to her tower and torture him before she kills him. "That is well said, Morgan le Fay," said Morgan le Fay, "for he bids fair to be one of the most strong knights of Arthur, whom I hate. This man, Sir Lancelot du Lake, is the favourite of all the ladies at that court who hate me. So will I lay an enchantment on him so that he shall sleep." So they put a spell on him to send him to sleep. And basically because they hate Arthur and they hate the court and all the ladies there. So they're all plotting against him, these women. Then the evil queen laid her hands over the face of Sir Lancelot and said strange words that none could understand. And then he was laid across the crupper of one of the knight's horses and did not wake. I think the crupper is the saddle. I think he's laid across the saddle. Back of the horse, it might be, I'm not sure. When in the twilight Sir Lancelot awoke, he found himself on a straw pallet in a strange room, and he leaped up and went to a narrow arrow slit in the wall and looked out. Before him for a great distance was black watery land, with the sun sinking far away on the very edge, and the pools of the marsh were as if they were of blood. Then he beat at the door, but none responded, and for wrath he could have dashed the door down, but it was too stout, and he had no weapon, for his arms had been taken from him. So this is that he's banging at the door, he's really angry, he's so angry he could have broken the door down, but the door is too strong, and he doesn't have any of his weapons. When it was dark suddenly, it seemed to Sir Lancelot that the room smelled foul, as if he had been carried into the midst of the quaking marsh, and was sunk deep in the slime and weeds of a pool. Then through the arrow slit he saw many strange lights come, dim and blue like the wild lights that dance and flit over the lonely marshes by night. But that which made him marvel was that these lights were 2 together, as if they were the eyes of evil things. And they came up to him with a breath that was cold and dank, and they seemed to peer into his face. But he could see naught of their bodies. The hair upon his head rose, and his skin went cold. They pressed all about him, and to defend himself he struck out at the eyes, but his blows beat only the air. Then suddenly Sir Lancelot felt sharp pains, as if small keen knives had been thrust into his flesh at many places. The stabs increased in number and in pain, and Sir Lancelot beat about himself and ran to and fro in the narrow chamber to escape the evil eyes and the stabs. But it was in vain, and thus all night in much misery he suffered. So he's being tortured by these evil creatures, and he's not able to fight them back because they're invisible. When for sheer weariness he lay down and tried to close his eyes, the evil things would not let him, but ever they tore at him and stabbed him. He was in anguish of mind more than he could bear, and for all his thought he could not think of any way to fight against the evil powers which followed and tortured him wherever he ran. But at dawn they fled, and then the door of the room opened, and a damsel appeared, and in her hands was a manchet of sour bread and a beaker of water from the ditch of the moat. The damsel was evilly clad in rags, and seemed like a scullion maid. These, she said, my mistress bid me say shall be your food until you die. Damsel, said Lancelot, tell me who hath brought me here and used me so evilly. It is Queen Morgan le Fay, said the damsel, and the 3 witch queens, the Queen of the Northgales, the Queen of the Out Isles, and the Lady of the Marshes. I doubt not then that they would slay me, said Lancelot, but why hate they me? It is for this, went on the damsel, that you did slay Sir Caradoc, the brother of the Lady of the Marshes. Alas then, said Sir Lancelot, there is no pity for me, and none of my dear friends shall learn of my shameful death. And so that you should suffer much ere you are slain, went on the damsel, they sent in the night for the Coranians, the marsh fiends, to torture you. Thus will they do until you die, unless, Sir Knight, you are a knight with a stout heart and a good fighter, and will do me justice. If you will be ruled by me, and will give me a promise, I will aid you. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. I'd like you to read on from page 53, and then there will be a task set for you on Satchel 1 in Google Classroom. I hope you enjoy the rest of the story, and I will see you and speak to you all soon. Take care, year 7. Bye bye.